The world changed in one single night. Cities once alive with laughter and movement became silent. Billions of voices disappeared, leaving behind only echoes and empty homes. No one heard screams. No one saw fire. But when the sun rose, 3 billion people were gone. In London, Daniel stood in the middle of a crowded street that was no longer crowded. He looked at the abandoned cars, doors wide open, as if people had stepped out for a second and never returned. The air was heavy, carrying no sound of children, no barking of dogs, no busy traffic horns. It was the silence that broke his heart. Daniel had survived, like many others, but no one understood why. Phones kept ringing without answers. The internet was filled with desperate questions. News channels repeated the same line again and again. 3 billion gone, cause unknown. Governments tried to calm the survivors, but the fear was greater than their words. On the second night, the dreams began. Daniel saw visions of caves deep underground. He saw black doors carved into stone, doors that pulsed with strange light. Behind those doors, something moved, something old, something waiting. He woke up sweating, but the dream returned every night, stronger, darker. He wasn't the only one. Across the world, survivors spoke of the same dream. Forums, radios, and broken networks buzzed with stories of dark caves, glowing doors, and voices whispering from below. Some believed it was the answer to what had happened. Others believed it was only madness. But Daniel knew it was real. One evening, while searching for food in an abandoned store, Daniel met Sarah. Her eyes were sharp, and she carried a small radio in her hand. She too had the dreams, and when Daniel shared his, she nodded without surprise. "There's a map," she whispered. "I found it in my grandfather's trunk, an old chart marking places beneath the earth, the same places from our dreams." Daniel felt his chest tighten. The truth was closer than he wanted. If the dreams were leading them somewhere, then the 3 billion lost lives were connected to it. Sarah believed the doors were prisons, ancient locks holding something humanity was never meant to see. And now, those locks were breaking. Together they traveled to the edge of the countryside. Fields stretched wide, but Daniel could not stop staring at the ground. Every shadow seemed alive. Every hole in the earth seemed like a mouth waiting to open. Sarah kept the radio close, listening to broken voices across the static. Survivors everywhere spoke of shaking grounds and voices whispering from the dark. On the fourth night, Daniel and Sarah camped near a hill. The dream returned stronger. This time, Daniel saw the door opening. A monstrous hand of stone and shadow pushed through. He woke up screaming, his voice echoing through the empty night. Sarah held his arm tightly, fear written on her face. She too had seen the same vision. By morning, the hill trembled. The earth cracked, and smoke rose from the ground. Daniel and Sarah stood frozen, realizing the dream was no longer just a dream. Something buried deep in the dark was waking, and humanity was about to face what it had locked away long ago. The hill shook again, louder than before. Daniel and Sarah backed away as the ground cracked like broken glass. The air smelled of ash, and a low hum rose from beneath the soil. It was not the sound of machines, but the heartbeat of something alive, something ancient. From the earth split a dark stone structure, taller than any tree nearby. It rose like a tower, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly. Sarah's radio screamed with static as if invisible hands pulled at its wires. And then, a whisper came through, not human, not clear, but powerful. "Unlocked," it said, followed by silence. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to run, but his legs refused. Sarah gripped his arm and forced him to breathe. She whispered, "It's the same door from the dreams." Daniel nodded slowly, his throat dry. If this was just one door, how many more were waking around the world? Before they could speak further, the stone door began to open. The sound was not like stone grinding, but like thousands of voices crying at once. A cold mist escaped, chilling their skin. And from within came a shadowy figure, tall and twisted, its body made of smoke and bone. It had no eyes, yet Daniel felt it looking straight into him. The weight of its gaze pressed on his chest, almost breaking him. Sarah whispered in terror, "It's one of them, one of the monsters we buried." The creature stepped onto the earth. Its presence bent the air, its form shifting like it was both solid and liquid. It opened its mouth, and the ground around it turned black as if life itself was dying. Daniel fell to his knees, clutching his head, hearing thousands of voices scream inside his mind. The creature spoke only one word: hunger. And then it turned toward the distant city. Sarah pulled Daniel up, shouting, "We have to go now." They ran, stumbling across rocks and broken ground. Behind them, the creature moved slowly, but every step cracked the soil and killed the grass. The tower pulsed brighter as if more were coming. Hours later, they hid in the ruins of a farmhouse. Daniel's body trembled as he remembered the voices. It was not just hunger for food, but for life itself. He whispered, 3 billion erased. Sarah, it wasn't random. They were taken to feed that thing. Her face went pale, but she nodded. The disappearances were no accident. The monsters had already been feeding long before the doors opened. Sarah pulled the map from her bag, her hands shaking. There are more sites, she whispered. More doors just like this. And if they all open? She did not finish the sentence, but Daniel knew the truth. It would mean the end of humanity. Not war, not famine, but extinction under creatures that were never meant to see the sun again. That night, as they tried to rest, Daniel heard voices outside. He held his breath, thinking the monster had found them. But then he realized the sounds were human. A group of survivors approached with flashlights, weapons in hand. Sarah gripped her radio, whispering, "We're not alone." The group entered the farmhouse cautiously. Their leader, a man with scars across his cheek, studied Daniel and Sarah. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked in a low voice. Daniel nodded slowly. The man continued, "We've seen one too, across the sea. Another door opened. Another monster came through." He stepped closer, his voice heavy with warning. "This isn't just happening here, it's happening everywhere." The survivors carried supplies and spoke of broken cities, of soldiers who tried to fight but failed. Bullets slowed the creatures, but could not kill them. Fire burned their forms, but they reshaped like smoke. Every attempt ended the same way: death and silence. And the monsters always whispered the same word: hunger. Daniel felt his fear grow into something heavier. Not just terror, but responsibility. If humanity had locked these creatures away once, then it meant they had fought them before. There had to be a way, a weapon, a secret buried in history. Sarah looked at him, as if reading his thoughts. She whispered, "We need to find out how our ancestors stopped them, before the whole world becomes their feast." Outside, the ground shook again, faint but real. More doors were opening. The night sky filled with a distant echo of voices. The awakening had only begun. The farmhouse was cold, but the survivors gathered close around a flickering lantern. Daniel studied their faces. Men and women hardened by fear, yet still holding on to hope. Sarah unrolled the map on the dusty table, her finger tracing the symbols that matched the dreams. Each mark represented a prison door buried deep beneath the earth, and many had already started to glow. The scarred leader introduced himself as Marcus. His voice was rough, but there was authority in it. "We are few, but we are not blind," he said. "The monsters are returning, but someone before us locked them away once. We need to know how." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then we look into history, something ancient, something erased." Sarah nodded, pulling out a small notebook filled with her grandfather's notes. Her grandfather had been a historian, obsessed with old legends that most ignored. Among the faded pages were stories of a time long ago, when humanity nearly fell. The text spoke of wars against dark ones that fed on life. It was said that millions were lost before the survivors found a way to trap them under the earth. "They were sealed, not destroyed," Sarah whispered. "And the seals are breaking now." The room went silent. Marcus leaned closer, his eyes hard. "Then we need to find the weapons they used, whatever gave them the power to lock away these things." One of the survivors, a young woman named Leah, shook her head. "Weapons won't matter if we don't understand them. Bullets don't kill shadows." Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it faint whispers. Daniel stood by the window, staring into the black fields. The voices were faint but constant, as if the earth itself was speaking. He could almost hear the words, hungry, waiting, awake. He clenched his fists, forcing the voices away. The group agreed to move toward an old library in the nearest city. If there were answers, they might be hidden in old texts forgotten by time. By dawn, They packed their supplies and set out, walking through broken roads and abandoned cars. Every step reminded them of the billions who had vanished, the world now an empty shell. As they reached the outskirts of the city, the smell of smoke filled the air. Buildings were half collapsed, and silence ruled the streets. Marcus raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. From the shadows of a ruined church, movement stirred. A monstrous shape slid across the stones, its form twisting like black smoke wrapped in bone. Its head turned, sensing life, and the whispers grew louder. The survivors crouched low, barely breathing. The creature moved slowly, feeding on the remains of plants and animals, its presence draining the air. Sarah clutched the notebook tightly, whispering to Daniel, "If they were sealed before, there must be a ritual, a method, something more than weapons." Daniel's heart raced, but he nodded. He remembered the dream of the door, how the symbols glowed when it was closed. Perhaps the markings were not just decoration, but keys. The group sneaked past the church, every heartbeat heavy. But as they reached the corner of the street, a car alarm suddenly wailed. The monster turned violently, its body stretching unnaturally fast. It roared, a sound that shook glass and stone. The survivors ran, their footsteps echoing against empty walls. The creature gave chase, its body flowing like liquid shadow. Daniel and Sarah stumbled into the library's broken doors, gasping for air. Marcus and Leah slammed the entrance shut, though it would never hold for long. The monster's roar vibrated through the stone, rattling bookshelves. Daniel grabbed Sarah's arm, pointing at the carvings above the old library arch. The same glowing symbols from the dreams were etched there, faint but real. "Look," Daniel whispered. "These symbols, they're the same ones from the seals." Sarah's eyes widened. Then this place was built on purpose, to guard something. The survivors spread out, searching through the ruins of books and scrolls. Dust filled the air as Marcus ripped open old chests, revealing manuscripts bound in cracked leather. Among them was a fragment of a story, half-burned but clear enough to read. It spoke of the first war of shadows, when the monsters rose to devour mankind. It spoke of warriors who carried light not of fire, but of life itself. They wielded relics that could force the creatures back into the earth. And above all, it spoke of a sacrifice, one that cost humanity greatly. Daniel's voice shook as he read. They gave their lives, thousands of them, to bind the doors with their own blood and spirit. The truth hit the group hard. To seal the monsters again would not only require the relics, but also sacrifice. Marcus clenched his fists, staring at the roaring shadow outside. "Then we have no choice," he said. "We either fight with their method, or we fall like the billions before us." The ground shook as the monster struck the library doors. Dust rained from the ceiling, books fell in heaps. Daniel raised the fragment high, his voice filled with desperate resolve. "Then we find the relics. We find the light, before it's too late." The monster's claw pierced through the door, and the survivors braced themselves, knowing this was only the beginning. The library shook as the monster forced its way inside. Its shadowy body spilled across the floor like smoke searching for prey. The survivors backed into the main hall, their flashlights cutting thin beams through the dust. Every step the creature took drained the warmth from the air, freezing the room with its hunger. Daniel clutched the burned manuscript, his eyes racing across the faded words. "Relics of light," he whispered, "made by the first ones, hidden in places of knowledge and stone." Sarah pulled him toward the grand staircase, her voice sharp. "If there's one here, we need to find it now." Marcus and Leah fired bullets into the monster, but the rounds passed through its form, sparks of shadow bursting like mist before reforming again. The monster screeched, its voice digging into their minds, whispering, "Feed, feed, feed." The survivors scattered through the shelves, their boots echoing on broken marble. Daniel rushed into a side chamber lined with glass cases, most shattered, books turned to dust. At the center stood a pedestal, covered in strange markings like the ones above the doors. On it rested a broken sphere of crystal, dull but humming faintly, as if alive. His heart pounded. This has to be it. He grabbed the relic, and a shock of light surged into his arm. For a moment, his vision blurred. He saw flashes of another time, warriors in ancient armor, standing before the same monster, raising the sphere high. Light burst forth, burning the shadow until it screamed. Daniel gasped and fell to his knees, but he held the relic tightly. The monster burst into the chamber, its smoke-like body filling the walls. Sarah screamed his name, but Daniel raised the sphere instinctively. The dull crystal flickered weakly, a spark glowing inside. The monster froze, its whispers faltering, as if afraid. The relic pulsed once, and a small wave of light pushed the shadow back. It roared in fury, smashing the shelves, but it did not come closer. Marcus and Leah rushed in, their eyes wide. "That thing works," Marcus growled. "Then use it." Daniel shook his head, sweat dripping down his face. "It's broken. It's not strong enough. Not yet." Sarah stepped closer, pointing to the manuscript still in his hand. "Maybe it needs more than just holding it. Maybe it needs life." The relic dimmed again, as if waiting. Daniel felt its hunger too, but it was different from the monster's. This relic craved strength, sacrifice, connection. He whispered, "It needs a piece of us to shine." The monster roared, slamming its claws against the walls, the entire library shaking. Shadows stretched like long fingers across the floor, reaching for them. Marcus shouted, "We don't have time for riddles, just do it." Daniel pressed the sphere against his chest, closing his eyes. Pain shot through his body, a burning so deep it nearly stopped his heart. But the relic responded, glowing brighter, lines of light crawling up his arm. The monster shrieked as the light grew. Daniel raised the sphere high, and this time it exploded with a beam that filled the chamber. The shadow creature recoiled, its body tearing apart like smoke in a storm. It screamed, clawing at nothing, before bursting into fragments that scattered into the air. The room fell silent, only the hum of the relic remaining. Daniel collapsed, his skin pale, sweat pouring. Sarah caught him before he hit the ground, whispering, "You're alive, but it took something from you." His voice was weak, "Not my life, but a part of it, my strength." Marcus picked up the manuscript, scanning the faded lines. "It says here, the relics draw from the living. They're fueled by human spirit itself." Leah's eyes widened with fear. "So every time we use it, someone pays the price." Sarah gripped Daniel's hand tightly, whispering, "Then we have no choice. Humanity already paid with 3 billion lives. We can pay more if it means saving what's left." The survivors gathered around the glowing relic. It was dim again, but alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. Daniel stared at it with tired eyes. If this is only one relic, there must be more, enough to fight them all. Marcus nodded firmly. "Then we find them, one by one, before the monsters turn the rest of the world into a grave." Outside, the night was no longer silent. From the distant city came echoes of screams, buildings collapsing, shadows rising. The awakening was spreading fast, and humanity's only hope lay in fragile hands, with relics that demanded sacrifice. The storm over the mountains burned red as if the sky itself was bleeding. Daniel, Sarah, Marcus, and the few survivors who remained climbed through the ruins of an old fortress. The relics they had gathered pulsed faintly in their bags, humming like restless hearts. Every step grew heavier, not only from exhaustion, but from the weight of what they carried. They had found 3 relics so far, each one different. One shaped like a crystal sphere, one like a blade of light, and one like a ring carved with living fire. Together they had defeated 2 more monsters, but each battle left scars on their souls. The relics demanded sacrifice, drawing strength directly from their bodies, leaving them weaker every time. Daniel felt it worst of all. The first relic had already taken much of his strength, his arms trembling even when still. Sometimes he felt his own heartbeat slow as if the relics were stealing pieces of him. Sarah watched him closely, her face lined with worry, though she never spoke of it aloud. That night, inside the fortress, they gathered around a broken fire pit. The relics lay between them, glowing faintly like trapped stars. Marcus placed his rifle down and said in a heavy voice, "We can't keep going like this. Every time we use them, someone dies or comes close to it." Leah, her hands shaking, whispered, "But without them, the monsters win, and the rest of us die anyway." Silence fell. Daniel finally spoke, his voice weak but steady. "It was never about winning without cost. Our ancestors knew it. They gave their lives to seal these things before. Now it's our turn." Sarah gripped his arm, her voice sharp. Not your turn, Daniel. Not yours every time. There has to be another way. Before Daniel could answer, the ground rumbled. A low howl spread through the fortress walls, rattling the stones. The monsters had found them. From the broken gates came not one, but 3 shadow forms, larger than the ones before. Their voices whispered together, merging into one terrifying chant. Hungry, hungry, hungry. The survivors scrambled to their feet. Marcus grabbed the light blade relic, and Sarah clutched the fire ring. Daniel reached for the crystal sphere, though his hands trembled violently. As the monsters advanced, the fortress shook, dust falling like rain. The relics flared, demanding life, demanding sacrifice. Marcus gritted his teeth and pressed the blade to his chest, letting it feed. The weapon exploded with burning light, slicing through the nearest shadow. But Marcus fell to his knees, blood dripping from his mouth. Sarah slipped the fire ring onto her hand, screaming as it burned her skin. Flames erupted, pushing the second monster back, its form writhing in pain. Daniel raised the crystal sphere, but it flickered weakly. He knew what it wanted. It wanted more than his strength. It wanted his life. His knees buckled, his vision blurred, but he held it high anyway. The sphere burst with a storm of light, tearing the third monster apart, its scream echoing into the night. When the battle ended, the fortress lay in ruins. Marcus was alive, but pale, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Sarah collapsed, the fire ring still burning her skin, tears rolling down her cheeks. Daniel fell flat on the stones, his chest rising weakly, the relic dim in his hand. Leah knelt beside him, crying, "You'll die if you keep this up. You can't be the one every time." Daniel forced a broken smile, whispering, "Someone has to carry the weight. Someone has to pay the price, or there will be no one left." Sarah's voice broke. "Then it should not be only you. Daniel, if sacrifice is the cost, it must be shared, or we'll lose more than our lives. We'll lose ourselves." The survivors gathered in silence, the relics glowing faintly between them. They all knew the truth now. To use the relics meant to give away pieces of themselves, and to save humanity meant becoming shadows of who they once were. Outside, the horizon glowed red, more doors opening, more monsters rising. The final battle was drawing closer, and the question remained heavy in their hearts. How much of humanity must be sacrificed before the monsters were sealed again? The world was breaking. Cities had fallen silent, their ruins swallowed by shadows. Across the horizon, red storms twisted like open wounds in the sky. Everywhere, the doors beneath the earth were opening, releasing monsters long buried. Daniel and the survivors reached the last marked site on Sarah's grandfather's map. It was not a fortress, not a city, but a valley filled with ancient stone pillars. At its center stood the largest door they had ever seen, carved into the earth itself, glowing with violent light. The whispers here were deafening, thousands of voices overlapping, chanting the same word again and again: hunger. Sarah held Daniel's arm as they stared at it. "This is the heart," she whispered. "If this door opens, the greatest of them will rise, the one that even our ancestors feared most." Marcus, pale and weak from the last battle, tightened his grip on the light blade, his voice shaking. "Then this is where it ends." The relics pulsed in their hands, brighter than before, as if they too felt the final battle near. But the survivors knew what that meant. The relics would demand more sacrifice than ever, perhaps all of it. The ground split, and the door began to open. A colossal shadow moved behind it, larger than mountains, its form unseen but its presence overwhelming. The survivors staggered, their hearts pounding, some falling to their knees under the crushing weight of its voice. "Hungry," it thundered, "hungry for all." Daniel stumbled forward, clutching the crystal sphere. His body was broken, his strength nearly gone, but his eyes burned with resolve. He turned to Sarah and whispered, "This is what the relics were made for, to end it once and for all." Tears streamed down her face. "Not alone. Daniel, you won't carry this alone." Marcus stepped forward, pressing the blade to his chest, its light flaring violently. Sarah raised the fire ring, its flames already burning her hand to ash. Leah gripped the second sphere they had found, her eyes wet but steady. Together, they lifted the relics toward the sky. The valley erupted with light, pure and blinding. The relics drew from them all, drinking their strength, their life, their very essence. Daniel felt his heart slowing, each beat like thunder fading. But he also felt the ancestors, their spirits joining, their voices rising. The relics were not only fueled by death, but by unity, by sacrifice freely given. The colossal monster roared, its shadow tearing across the valley. But the light struck it, piercing through its endless form. It screamed, a sound that shook the mountains and split the sky. The survivors held on, their bodies trembling, their lives slipping away. But the relics burned brighter, sealing the door shut, forcing the shadow back into the depths. The ground shook, the pillars cracked, the air filled with fire and dust. And then, silence. The door was sealed, the whispers gone, the valley still. The monsters that had escaped screamed across the world before collapsing into ash. The relics dimmed, their purpose complete. Daniel collapsed to the ground, the crystal sphere shattering into dust in his hand. Sarah crawled to his side, her face pale, her tears mixing with blood. Marcus lay near the ruins, breathing faintly, his blade cracked in half. Leah clutched her broken relic, whispering a prayer. Daniel's voice was weak, but steady. We did it, not because we were stronger, but because we were willing. Sarah pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "You gave everything, Daniel, all of you did." As the sun rose over the valley, the sky cleared for the first time in weeks. The world was scarred, broken, and empty, but alive. Billions were gone, but the survivors had won. Humanity had paid the price again, just as their ancestors had. And though few remained, their story would live. A story of sacrifice, of light against hunger. A story that whispered one truth through the ages. Humanity fought, and humanity endured. The relic's glow dimmed, but its hum stayed in Daniel's hand. Every beat of its light matched his own heartbeat, weaker than before. Sarah refused to let him walk alone, but Daniel pushed forward. "If I fall, someone else must carry it," he said, his voice steady but tired. Marcus led the group out of the ruined library. The city outside was broken, streets cracked, buildings leaning like bones of giants. But worse than ruins were the sounds, faint whispers, distant roars, and the cries of survivors hunted by shadows. Every step was a reminder that the monsters were not only awakening, but spreading. Sarah studied the map, circling another marked location. "This one is in the mountains, far north," she said. "If another relic exists, it may be there." Leah frowned. "And if it isn't? We'll just be walking into more death." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice. The monsters are multiplying. Without these relics, humanity is finished." They scavenged supplies from the city, moving through abandoned shops and burned-out vehicles. The air was thick with ash, but Daniel felt the relic tugging him forward. It was not just an object, it was a guide, pulling toward something greater. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of light, voices chanting, warriors standing in a circle with relics raised high. The message was clear: together, not alone. On the second night of travel, they camped in an empty farmhouse. Sarah kept watch while Daniel slept, but his dreams were restless. He saw 3 more doors breaking open, oceans boiling as shadows spilled into the waters, deserts trembling with beasts made of sand and smoke, skies turning black with wings that blotted out the sun. He woke in terror, whispering, "It's not just here, the whole world is falling." By morning, they met another band of survivors, ragged and starving, carrying children with hollow eyes. The leader of the group, an older woman named Mara, begged for help. "The shadows took our town," she whispered. "We lost everyone. Please, if you have a weapon, give it to us." Daniel held the relic close, shaking his head. "This cannot be given away. It demands a price you cannot pay." But Mara looked into his eyes and understood. "Then take us with you," she said. "If we are to die, let it be fighting." The group grew larger, their footsteps heavier. Children cried softly, carried by tired arms, but still they walked. Marcus did not like the burden, but he said nothing. Leah whispered bitterly, "The more we carry, the slower we move, the easier we die." Sarah shot her a sharp look. "The fight is not just ours, it's for all of humanity." By the third day, they reached the foothills of the mountains. Snow clung to the peaks, and the wind howled through the valleys. The relic in Daniel's hand pulsed faster, as if sensing what lay ahead. But the mountains were not empty. At dusk, they saw it, another monster, larger than the one in the library. Its body was made of jagged stone wrapped in black mist, its steps shaking the ground. It carried no eyes, no face, but its roar shattered the silence of the valley. The survivors panicked, running toward caves, hiding behind rocks. Marcus raised his rifle, but Daniel stopped him. Bullets won't stop this, only the relic can. But when Daniel lifted the sphere, it glowed weakly, no strength left inside. He fell to his knees, gasping. It needs more, it needs someone to give. Silence fell on the group, the monster's heavy steps closing in. Mara, the old woman, stepped forward, her eyes calm. "You are too young to give what is needed," she whispered. "But I have lived my years, let me be the one." Before Daniel could stop her, she pressed her hands onto the relic. A searing light rushed from her body into the crystal, her scream echoing through the valley. The relic flared bright, brighter than the sun, and Mara collapsed, her body lifeless. The monster recoiled, its stone-like body cracking as light shot through it. With a final roar, it shattered into fragments that dissolved into the air. The valley went still, the only sound the relic humming again, stronger than before. The children wept for Mara, but Sarah knelt beside her body, whispering, "You gave us a chance." Daniel's hands trembled as he held the relic. It no longer felt like a tool, but a curse. Every victory would demand sacrifice. He whispered, "How many must die before humanity can live?" Marcus looked at the mountains ahead, his face grim. "As many as it takes," he said. Sarah squeezed Daniel's hand. "We can't stop now. We carry their sacrifice forward." The group began their climb, the relic glowing softly like a wounded heart. But in the distance, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. It was not weather, but the sound of more doors breaking. The world was tearing open, and time was running out.